In Albuquerque, New Mexico, 5 murders and no suspects have police at a dead end.
We had nothing. We had no fingerprints. We had no hair samples.
Will Dr. Henry Lee be able to help investigators find the clues they need? And in Honolulu, a double murder with international implications.
The fire was originated from this location.
The first thing they told me was, you have the wrong person.
Can Dr. Lee reconstruct what happened and help police solve this complicated murder case?
Meditation is an important part of my life. My day is pretty long, generally about 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I practice meditation, basically helping clear up the mind, to concentrate. You can focus your energy, your mental ability to study the case and to come up with a solution.
In New Mexico's high desert, the city of Albuquerque stands over one of America's most majestic desert plains. With its wide open spaces and stunning views, Albuquerque is a tranquil city that has opened its arms to everyone. But one crisp March morning, that tranquility was shattered. Police received a 911 call from a local video store where 3 bodies had been found. Homicide detective Vicki Duran was dispatched to the scene.
The employees had come to work to check in for the day. They had found their co-employees from the night before in the back room.
Dead were Zachary Blacklock, Jawanda Castillo, and Myles Doty. All 3 had been shot in the back of the head.
They were face down on the floor. 2 of them had their hands behind their back.
Working their way through the store, detectives found an open safe and 5 empty cash drawers. Less than $1,000 was missing, but on the counter was a plastic bank bag containing nearly $3,000 in cash.
There was money left behind. Somebody came, somebody interrupted the robbery, and they were scared away.
As the Mobile Police Command Center arrived, media and onlookers began to assemble outside the store where word was spreading about the triple homicide. That was when Holly Lawrence and her sister arrived, looking for their cousin Zachary Blacklock, who had worked the late shift but hadn't come home after work.
I saw the yellow crime scene tape around the store and parking lot, and we kept asking about Zachary. Is Zachary dead? And an advocate came from the district attorney's office and met with us and talked to us and did tell us that Zachary was dead.
The devastating news about Zachary only confirmed a bigger fear. Holly and her sister were also looking for their grandparents George and Pauline McDougal, who were supposed to pick Zachary up after a shift ended at 2 a.m.
So my sister and I did a plea, if you will, to the media that evening.
If anybody has seen them, or if they hear this, we want you to call us, call the Albuquerque Police Department. We will do anything for you.
Detectives feared the missing grandparents and the 3 murders were related. While an APB was issued for the McDougals in their car, crime scene investigators worked through the night processing the video store for evidence.
There was significant blood spatter in the back office area, and we also saw evidence of cartridge casings on the floor.
Next to the 3 victims were 9 9mm shell casings. Several slugs were embedded in the floor. Hoping the killer had been captured on videotape, investigators checked the video surveillance system, but the tape was missing from the VCR. By day's end, Albuquerque police had little to go on, and there was still no sign of the McDougals.
I personally, and I know the other detectives were so afraid. Are there killers on the street? Are they going to kill somebody again? Are they going to commit another robbery tomorrow night and kill 3 more kids?
The answer came the following morning.
About 11:30 in the morning, we got a phone call from some of the detectives, And the detectives told us that they had found my grandparents' bodies in the East Mountains.
The McDougal's bodies were found 25 minutes northeast of Albuquerque on a dirt road just off Highway 14 next to their car. They had sustained several gunshot wounds.
We found numerous 9mm cartridge casings near the bodies of the same brand that we found at the Hollywood video store.
There seemed to be no question that the two crimes were connected, and this mountain scene yielded a vital clue.
If it takes one person to maintain their custody, another person to drive a car out there, or a second vehicle, we're looking at least two suspects involved in this incident.
It was the largest mass murder in Albuquerque history, and the killers were still at large.
But none of these people had any enemies. They all lived very exemplary lives. I think the police were very concerned about this, that this was not going to be an easy crime to solve because there were no immediate suspects.
No suspects, but maybe a witness. Video rental receipts allowed police to track down the last known customer on the night of the murder, and he remembered something.
He described somebody as a skinny white male and a female as well, both who were in the store looking around at different videos and were there when he was there and then still when he left.
So based on that information, we decided to pick one wall of videotapes that was around the office and process those for latent fingerprints. As a result of that, we ended up processing more than 1,200 videotapes.
Detectives compared the lifted prints with those in all available fingerprint files and databases. The results came back without a match.
We had nothing. We had no fingerprints, we had no hair samples, we had no footprints, we had nobody to compare them to even if we did have some.
Desperately in need of help, police turned to the public. A reward was established in hopes of enticing someone to come forward with information.
Media is getting the word out on every newscast. Every time they had a break into programming, they would also tout the reward fund.
With the investigation stalled, police decided that a fresh set of eyes might see something they had missed, and the eyes they wanted belonged to the world's foremost expert in crime scene analysis, Dr. Henry Lee.
I still remember vividly that night I received a phone call. Albuquerque Police Chief needs assistance in this case. 5 people died. At the beginning, very little information. No witnesses, not much physical evidence.
Only Henry Lee could answer the tough questions facing investigators.
The question they raised to me is where it started. How did it happen? What's most likely, what kind of suspect? What's the basic motive?
Dr. Lee decided to take the case. But would he see something crime scene investigators had missed? With at least 2 killers on the loose and the city of Albuquerque on high alert, police had little to go on in the murders of 5 innocent victims. That was when they asked Dr. Henry Lee to consult on their findings.
Many times, at the beginning, you don't have an informer. You don't have witnesses. You don't have somebody confess. That's the most crucial time. The physical evidence, the ammo, the relationship with the victim shows us the same group of people commit this heinous crime.
Dr. Lee recently returned to Albuquerque to meet with crime scene investigator Guy Pierce to re-examine the investigation.
We had thousands and thousands of videotapes that we had to decide on how to process.
That's a difficult job.
Now, this room is very similar to the office where the homicides occurred.
Guy Pierce and Dr. Lee were joined by Joe Foster to review the crime scene.
We had 3 bodies in this general area. We had one woman where her head was right about here.
Okay. Something that's really interesting too, you see that there's not much high velocity blood spatter in this area, but there's a much denser concentration on this victim than the body you see here.
Right.
Okay. And her head would be up in this position here.
Right.
Of this victim that shows cartridge casings that were located in the area where her feet were.
Right.
It was crucial for investigators to establish a sequence of events.
Of course, the casing, some have a blood spatter on it. Right. Then we can tell that casing has to eject before that blood drop was deposited.
A situation where all the victims are face down, basically execution style.
Basically, he wanted to kill the witness.
With a clear vision of what had transpired in the video store, investigators traveled back to the mountain site of the McDougal's murders.
There were tire tracks along the road behind it. There were some in this area, some over in front of where Joe is. There was a tire track right about here. And all of these were different than the victim's vehicle.
Obviously, suspect left the scene. Obviously, somebody had to drive with that two victims. So I look at least two suspects.
The McDougal's bodies were found a few paces away from their vehicle near a barbed wire fence.
So in this area, we found the bodies, and on the other side of the fence, we had about 16 9mm cartridge casings. There was a cluster of 5 9mm in this area.
Second group this location, the third group that location, okay?
The person was standing close to this area and fired 5 shots.
Placing yellow place cards where all 16 9mm shell casings were found, investigators noticed a pattern that tells them something about the shooter.
It indicates could be a right-handed person shooting.
Right-handed person.
Investigators were looking for 2 people, one of them right-handed, but police still had no suspects. As frustration grew, so did the reward fund.
It would double and double and double until it got to $100,000, which apparently was the magic number.
9 long days after the murders, detectives finally got the break they were hoping for. An ex-convict named John LaSalle called the hotline from Colorado and said an old girlfriend had confessed to killing the McDougals.
But I told him, I said, yeah, I'm the one that killed the grandparents.
But when police tracked down Esther Beckley and brought her in for questioning, her story changed. While admitting she had been in the video store during the robbery, she insisted that another ex-con, Shane Harrison, had rounded the victims up and pulled the trigger. It was all police needed to kick the investigation into high gear.
We came here to 126 Buena Vista where Shane Harrison was residing at that time, and we conducted some search warrants. Inside Shane's apartment, we found a black duffel bag. It had numerous guns in it.
Inside the black duffel bag was a Tech 9 9mm handgun. But when the gun was dusted for fingerprints, none could be found.
He wore the surgical gloves. I had on a pair of winter gloves.
At the Albuquerque Crime Lab, ballistics expert Mike Haig test-fired the weapon found in Shane Harrison's duffel bag into a water tank to compare it to shell casings and slugs found at the crime scene.
They began the comparison process to compare known cartridge casings fired from the Tech 9 to the evidence that had been recovered from the crime scene.
The bullets and casings from both crime scenes were a perfect match to those from the test firings.
And it was determined that the Tech 9 recovered in Shane Harrison's apartment had been used at the Hollywood Video Store and in the East Mountains.
Shane Harrison was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, but the case against him was far from solid.
Of course, he can claim somebody used his weapon, borrow his weapon, fired a shot. We still cannot put his hand on the weapon itself.
As predicted, Harrison claimed he was innocent and said he had loaned the gun to Esther Beckley. Detectives needed more definitive evidence and started canvassing Shane Harrison's neighborhood.
So we made contact with Shane's next-door neighbor. He indicated to us that he had a jacket belonging to Shane.
Police sent the jacket to the Albuquerque Crime Lab for tests. Dr. Lee and Mike Haig reconstruct the examination of the jacket for trace evidence, connecting it to the crime scenes.
It's a big jacket.
After examining the jacket's exterior, Dr. Lee next inspected the jacket's pockets.
All right, let's check the pocket. Looks like some reddish material here.
Good trace.
DNA analysis revealed it was blood belonging to Zachary Blacklock. But how had it gotten inside a jacket pocket?
This jacket fit you pretty well, and when you open up...
Dr. Lee tested the police theory that blowback from the shots that killed Zachary had deposited blood on the gun barrel, which was transferred to the jacket when the weapon was put back inside the pocket. When confronted with the new evidence, Harrison explained it by saying he had loaned the jacket to Esther Beckley. At her attorney's urging, Beckley now agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for immunity from the death penalty. Police hoped she could lead them to a crucial piece of evidence, the missing surveillance video.
I went up to the assistant manager and I said, "Get the tape out of the machine. Give me the tape out of the machine."
After the murders, they had taken the video to Shane's apartment and destroyed it. When police checked to see if any of the tape had survived, they got lucky.
Shane's next-door neighbor. He indicated to us that Shane had tried to clean his house and borrowed his vacuum cleaner. And so, of course, we got the vacuum cleaner bag from the house.
And inside the bag, they hit pay dirt.
Some little piece plastic material.
What was in the vacuum cleaner bag was the remnants of videotape that Shane probably destroyed.
The destroyed tape couldn't yield any video evidence, but it did show that so far, Esther Beckley's story was accurate. Police still needed to connect Harrison to the McDougal crime site, but a search of his car's interior turned up nothing. It was when police examined the vehicle's undercarriage that their fortunes changed.
We noticed that a plastic air dam mounted on the front of the car had a large piece broken out of it. So we sent 2 detectives back up to the crime scene where the McDougals had been found, and they did find a piece of plastic that appeared to have come from that air dam. And we took that piece and compared it to the air dam itself.
Excellent job. It's a perfect fit.
As the evidence was piling up against Shane Harrison, his attorney continued to argue that police had charged the wrong person.
Shane Harrison had an automobile that he loaned to Esther Beckley that night that she borrowed from him. So it wasn't unusual to find part of Shane's car. We would expect to find part of it there. I mean, she committed the crimes.
Who's telling the truth, who ain't? When we look at those things about the blood on the jacket, firearms evidence from the scene, the air dam located at the scene, there's all these little pieces of the puzzle that come together.
Informant John Lassell collected the $100,000 reward money, and the prosecution prepared for trial. But whose story would Dr. Lee's crime scene analysis support? Because of the intense media coverage in Albuquerque, the murder trial was moved 150 miles west to Las Cruces. Despite Esther Beckley's confession, convicting Shane Harrison was going to be a challenge for the prosecution. But they did have Beckley to fill in any gaps in the story.
While we were still back there getting him ready to tie him up, had him laying on the floor and everything, the little boy's grandparents came to pick him up. Shane said, "Go out there and stall him."
Dr. Lee, Guy Pierce, and Joe Foster used lab interns to stand in for the victims as they reconstructed the video store murders.
At that point, I believe that he could have shot this young man twice in the head.
Create a lot of blood spatter in this location.
And
probably
shot her next. Stepped in, shot her 3 times in the head.
Shane came out the door and he was like a whole different person. His facial features were completely changed, and he told your grandparents he told me to drive his car and follow them.
Harrison forced the McDougals at gunpoint to get on the freeway and drive east. Then he made them pull off to a remote location just off Highway 14. He didn't want to leave any witnesses.
That both of these individuals were shot with a slug, or a solid chunk of lead.
He knew from past experience that when you commit an armed robbery and you leave witnesses, you can go to prison for that.
Sensing the jury might question the lack of physical evidence placing Shane Harrison at the murder scene, the prosecution decided to present a vivid reconstruction of everything that took place that night.
As a team, everyone came up with the idea that Why don't we show the jury what we can show them so that they feel it somehow? We also needed to have those details to bolster Esther Beckley's testimony.
It's like that. There.
One up next to it.
It's heavy, start running down, right?
Started to run down, and she did have quite a bit of blood spatter on her hand.
Quite a bit.
The prosecution did such a good job with that recreation of the crime scene in this case that you could smell the death in the courtroom.
When it came to the McDougal murders, prosecutors used Esther Beckley to paint the horrible picture for the jury.
When we got out to the mountains where he got the people out of the car, he walked them to the side. And he started shooting.
We fire 5 shots.
Fired
Bam,
5
bam,
here.
bam, bam.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Uh-huh.
Change slightly over this way.
You can look at a photo all day long, but if you're looking at a room with people laying in it, in the position they were found in, that brings a whole new aspect to what you're seeing.
The dramatic presentation of all the evidence gave the prosecution the result it wanted. The jury found Shane Harrison guilty of felony murder. He received a sentence of 258 years.
Esther Beckley's sentence was 90 years. And so she, having been 42 when she started serving her sentence, will die in prison. And Shane Harrison will certainly die in prison.
The way forensics is nowadays, it's just a matter of time. I mean, did they think they're going to get away with it? Nobody gets away with it.
The tragedy of the video store murders was a case of he said, she said. But the forensic evidence examined by investigators and Dr. Lee supported Esther Beckley's story.
Dr. Lee was able to give them more information, validate what their thoughts were, and point them in a direction that made their courtroom work so effective for the jury.
You have to put the ego aside, work together, and try to find out scientific truth.
Next, a double murder, a cover-up. Can Dr. Lee help Hawaiian police? Honolulu, Hawaii, the island city where East meets West, a popular destination for tourists from Asia as well as the United States. This link with the two continents would become crucial in a case that began with a fire at a luxurious condominium high-rise overlooking Waikiki Beach.
The fire had been extinguished and firemen had located the body of a female in a closet. The female was taken to the hospital where she was pronounced dead.
Firefighters thought the woman had tried to escape the fire by hiding in a closet before being overcome by fumes. But that was not how the victim died.
And at the hospital, it was found that she had a through-and-through bullet wound in her chest. So that made it a homicide.
Investigators determined that the dead woman was the condo owner Kotatomi Fujita, a well-known Japanese psychic and socialite, meaning her death would be international news. Police began going door to door in the high-rise thinking someone had to have heard or seen something.
When I got to the scene, some of the officers had taken statements from some residents, and some of them had seen a male leaving the apartment.
But just as the investigation at the condominium was getting underway, police were called to a second fire some 3 miles away. A car had been found engulfed in flames in the parking garage of the Park Shore Hotel, and this suspicious blaze had also produced a victim.
And after that fire had been extinguished, the body of a male was found in the right front seat. It was discovered that his feet were bound with duct tape, his hands were bound with duct tape, and he was wrapped up in some sheets. He had a bullet wound in his chest.
The body in the car was soon identified as Goro Fujita, the son of the murdered socialite Kotatomi Fujita. Investigators came to the obvious conclusion.
We looked at it at that point as being a double homicide involving the mother and a son.
When I found out who the victim was, I decided to get involved because I could see at that point in time it would have some international implications.
Police were unable to access the charred and waterlogged condo until the next morning. One bedroom had been ransacked, with drawers and suitcases thrown open. Was this a botched robbery? That theory gained strength when police learned that Korotomi Fujita had made a phone call to her bank's president that afternoon with an unusual request, that $20,000 in cash be sent to her apartment immediately.
The president told her this is the United States, he can't do anything like that. Korotomi had indicated to the president that there was a Japanese male over there who was waiting for her. She said the money was important because a person's life might depend on it. Korotomi asked the president to talk to this male that was in her apartment who could understand Japanese. And right about that time, the phone went dead.
The bizarre money demand seemed to support the detective's theory that this was a robbery gone bad. Police immediately began looking for surveillance tapes, only to find that the building didn't have a security system in the elevators. The charred apartment and the car were yielding no leads, and the police were forced to wait for a break. It came when some of Korotomi Fujita's jewelry turned up at a local pawn shop.
These items were identified as belonging to Korotomi Fujita. The person who sold the jewelry was Raita Fukusaku. He used his passport as a means of identification.
Honolulu detectives quickly learned that Raita Fukusaku had befriended Goro Fujita after the two met at a scuba diving club.
Raita Fukusaku was a Japanese national who ended up spending a good portion of his life living in the United States, and in particular California. That's how he and Goro essentially got involved together.
But the friendship had recently soured.
We found out that Raita Fukusaku had borrowed money from Goro Fujita and had not paid him back. My first instinct was he's a con artist, he's a scammer.
But when detectives went looking for Fukusaku, they discovered that he had fled the islands the day after the murders, spending $1,800 for a one-way plane ticket to Japan.
Well, the detectives started investigating Raita Fukusaku. They went to his apartment and found that he had abandoned his apartment and went back to Japan.
Police got a warrant to search Fukusaku's apartment and walked into what looked like a third crime scene.
There was something odd that I noticed. First of all, right in the middle of the living room, there was 4.5 by 7.5 foot portion of the carpeting that was cut out from the floor.
On the padding where the carpet had been removed, investigators found traces of blood. What was originally thought to be an apartment fire had quickly evolved into a double murder with at least 2 crime scenes, and now probably a third. Knowing such an intricate case would take expert analysis, prosecuting attorney Kenneth Kaneshiro turned to Dr. Henry Lee, the renowned forensic scientist.
When a case just happened, the police, emergency people will respond. One body after another, one fire after another. This case is a very complicated case.
With the crime scene photos in hand, Dr. Lee traveled to Hawaii for a first-hand look at the multiple crime scenes and to play his part in solving a double murder with international implications. In Honolulu, Hawaii, police were investigating the double murder of a wealthy Japanese socialite and her son. Their only suspect, Raita Fukusaku, had fled to his native Japan. But no Japanese national had ever been returned to the United States to stand trial for murder. And when he was questioned by Japanese police, Fukusaku denied any involvement in the double homicide, and the police took him at his word.
The first thing they told me was, you have the wrong person. And I said, no, I think we have the right person. He said, well, you don't have any confession. I said, yes, we don't have a confession. He said, well, you have the wrong person. In Japan, when they arrest someone, 99% of those they arrested confess to the crime. So I told the Japanese police, I said, well, Fukusaku is not traditional Japanese. He's westernized. He went to school in the United States in California, so he has the mind of the Westerner, which is when you caught with something, you always find an excuse or you blame someone else.
Honolulu police knew they didn't have the evidence yet to convince a Japanese court to extradite Fukusaku. That was when they turned to the one man they thought could help.
My participation basically is to look into the scientific evidence and how the DNA can be used to the advantage of the prosecution.
Because of the fire, the entire apartment had to be rebuilt.
Dr. Lee and Detective Glushenko reviewed the crime scene details of the fire at Kototomi's condominium.
Heavy smoke stand. Now the smoke stand shows this fire was initiated from the closet.
Finding evidence linking Fukusaku to the murders within a fire-ravaged apartment would be difficult. Next, Dr. Lee went to the Discovery Bay apartments where Fukusaku lived, looking for a trail investigators could follow, and what they found was even better.
Dr. Lee, this is one of the 4 elevators in the building. Each elevator has their own separate security camera. This one has it up there. The recording system that's at Discovery Bay is very unique. It's an excellent system. You can pretty much track a person's movement throughout the building.
It took 5 days for investigators to review all the surveillance tapes from the 16 cameras. Their efforts paid off. On the morning of the murders, Fukusaku and Goro Fujita are spotted together entering the elevator.
In the morning of the murders, right to Fukusaku and Goro Fujita get into an elevator. They go up to his floor, 13th floor, get out. And Goro Fujita is never, ever again seen on any of the cameras after that.
Fukusaku is seen alone at 12:55 p.m. leaving his building. But investigators felt they knew where he spent his next 3 hours.
During this time is when we believe Kototomi Fujita is killed and her apartment is set on fire.
When Fukusaku returned to his building at 4 in the afternoon, he was now carrying a bulging white shoulder bag, which police suspected contained the stolen goods from Kototomi Fujita's condo.
Goes back to his apartment. Later on that night, the security cameras show right to Fukusaku using a hand truck that's available to residents at Discovery Bay. On a hand truck, it looks like there's a body wrapped up in cloth and material that he moves from his apartment to the 10th floor parking level of the garage.
The last image of Fukusaku was that of him leaving the parking garage with his disconcerting cargo positioned in the folded-down front passenger seat.
That videotape showed the suspect with a large package on a hand truck. But the videotape will not tell us, is this really the body? How to link this hand truck and the body to the original scene. So scientific evidence provides that crucial link.
He was moving some items using a hand truck. The residents can sign out a hand truck in the building. We found a hand truck in the back rooms.
Investigators hoped there was trace evidence on the cart that linked Fukusaku to the murders of Kototomi and Goro Fujita. It would be a long shot. In Honolulu, with crime lab specialist Tracy Tanaka, Dr. Lee reconstructs where investigators found blood on the handcart.
Here we see some, looks like a drop, dripping, which means the blood source is from the top downwards. Now, let's collect that.
Blood, but who did it belong to? Back at the crime lab, the answer came back. The DNA profile of the swab revealed that the blood was Goro Fujita's.
Here, the DNA, we can either link a suspect to a crime scene or exonerate somebody. But this particular case, we really did not find the suspect's DNA. We used victim's DNA, link this case.
The noose was beginning to tighten around Raita Fukusaku. He had been careless as he tried to clean up the crime scene. Very careless.
We learned again from Discovery Bay security tapes that Raita moves a large love seat, has no cushions on it, it's kind of cut up. He's moving it on the same hand truck down to the basement level.
When police went looking for this potentially valuable piece of evidence, they found the love seat still sitting in the basement, waiting for the monthly oversized trash pickup.
This looks similar to the sofa that was recovered.
There looks like quite a bit of evidence on there, right, Jersey?
Investigators immediately found blood, and lots of it.
Okay, that's a good piece. Let's take back to the DNA to confirm that's victim's blood or not.
And when they looked closer, investigators found something they didn't expect to find. Lying just beneath the seat springs.
Yeah, it looks like a 357 copper jacketed bullet. Let's send to the firearm to do some comparison.
The ballistics comparison at the lab showed that the bullet found in the love seat matched the one that killed Kototomi in her condo, proving that the same gun had been used to murder both victims. And that wasn't all the couch revealed.
Yeah, that looks like quite a few hair.
It looks pretty long. It could be probably a female's hair.
Yeah, we take back to the laboratory, take a microscopic examination.
A woman's hair was found on the love seat, which investigators later matched to Kototomi Fujita. They believe that her son Goro had deposited the hair there through a secondary transfer, again proving his presence in Fukuzaku's apartment.
Large amount of blood shows he was sitting on the love seat. He was restrained, taped with duct tape, then moved the body with a hand truck down the elevator, put in the car, set in the fire. Well, you got here middle of the night, right? About 11 o'clock?
About 11:30 at night.
11:30 at night.
Next, Dr. Lee reconstructs the examination of the clothing that Goro Fujita was wearing when his body was found in the burning car. Specifically, he was looking for what started the fire.
Do a GC mass spec analysis to determine what type of accelerant. The type of accelerant, that's another piece of evidence, was identified as charcoal lighter type of fluid on his body. And the wrapping, quill, and sheet is an intentional fire.
The evidence piling up against Fukuzaku seemed overwhelming. But would it be enough to persuade the Japanese authorities to extradite Fukuzaku back to Honolulu to stand trial? Honolulu authorities were desperate to extradite Raida Fukuzaku back to the United States from Japan to stand trial for the double murders of Japanese socialite Kototomi Fujita and her son Goro.
The biggest hurdle that they had was the Japanese government didn't trust the work that we did. And basically what they had to do was they had to present the whole case to the Japanese authorities and show them that we had all this evidence.
Prosecutor Kaneshiro and his team of investigators went to Tokyo to meet with the Japanese authorities and present their case.
The four of us went to Japan, and I showed them the picture of Fukuzaku in the elevator with the hand truck and what appears to be a body wrap in the bed sheet on that hand truck. I said, we have this evidence against him. You tell me he did not commit the murder. That's when they agreed, and they said, okay, we think you probably have the right person, we'll help you.
After a court hearing in which Kaneshiro presented not only the incriminating videotapes, but also the DNA profiles of Goro's blood on the handcart, the Japanese government agreed to extradite Fukuzaku to Honolulu to stand trial.
I was told this is the first Japanese national that was extradited from Japan back to the United States to stand trial for murder.
Now that Fukuzaku was back in U.S. custody, the state of Hawaii began to prepare for the trial.
The defendant was charged with 1 count of murder in the first degree and 2 counts of murder in the second degree.
And forensic science would play a key role.
This case was a very involved case from a forensic point of view. There were multiple crime scenes, meaning Kototomi Fujita was shot and killed in her apartment. Goro Fujita was shot and killed in the defendant's apartment. His body was then taken to the far end of Waikiki.
On one of his many trips to Hawaii, Dr. Lee instructed the prosecutors on how DNA could be used in this case.
Through DNA profile on a hand truck, on a sofa, love seat. In this case, we want to know, is the blood stain found in this handcart? Whose blood is this? Can we link to one of the victims.
Dr. Lee has the ability to sort of convey it in a fashion that is very, very plain, and very clear, and those are the types of things as a prosecutor we look for, because if we can make it plain and clear and simple, the average Joe on the street can understand it.
Just before the case was ready for trial, Dr. Lee and Keith Kaneshiro met to discuss the possible defenses Raida Fukuzaku might present to the jury.
We start seeing the picture. The fire basically is conceived for the crime.
We believe that Raida Fukuzaku was guilty of participating in the cover-up of a homicide. We do not believe that he committed the homicide. Raida Fukuzaku was a fairly low member of an organized crime group in Japan. His family had been threatened, he had been threatened, his girlfriend had been threatened, and it was made very clear to him that he had to do certain things.
This was a particularly long case, and even for a murder trial, it was exceptionally long.
The trial made headlines not only in Hawaii, but in Japan as well, where it was front-page news almost daily.
I think it was a circumstantial evidence case with many different pieces that came together and fit perfectly to point out that this one defendant acting alone committed these murders. There was hair evidence, there was ballistic evidence, there was videotapes. It was everything that fit together very well.
One of the biggest things that was compelling in this case was DNA evidence. The science doesn't lie.
After days of deliberation, Raida Fukuzaku was found guilty of both counts of murder in the second degree. On both sides of the Pacific, the public and media responded with relief that justice had prevailed in this infamous case.
Once the jury concluded that he was guilty, the court then had the responsibility of sentencing Mr. Fukuzaku.
I sentenced Mr. Fukuzaku to 2 life terms imprisonment with the possibility of parole, and the sentences were to run consecutively. That means basically he would serve 2 life sentences, one after the other.
But that's one thing I learned from Dr. Lee. Just because you find one piece of evidence, you don't stop there. He was a strong support and a source for how to do the investigation.
This case shows the value of the forensic evidence, shows how important the team was able to put this difficult case and piece by piece examine the scientific evidence, work with the district attorney, and he was able to present the case to the court of law, and jury reached the correct verdict.